I woke up Tuesday morning to the sound of construction equipment rumbling through my peaceful neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona, and immediately knew something was wrong because nobody had mentioned any planned work on our quiet residential street. The diesel engine growl was coming from my backyard, which sent me jumping out of bed and racing to the window in nothing but my boxers. What I saw made my blood pressure spike like I'd chugged 3 espressos on an empty stomach. A crew of 4 men in bright yellow vests were actively installing a 6-foot privacy fence that cut straight through the middle of my backyard, dividing my property into 2 completely unequal sections. The fence line ran from my eastern property boundary all the way to the western side, creating what looked like a bizarre partition that served absolutely no logical purpose. My carefully maintained lawn, the fire pit I'd built last summer, and half of my vegetable garden were now on the opposite side of this ridiculous barrier. I threw on jeans and a t-shirt faster than I'd ever dressed in my life and practically flew down the stairs. My name is Marcus Ingram, and I'd lived in this house for 6 years without a single major problem. Sure, the homeowners association had always been a bit uptight about lawn maintenance and paint colors, but nothing had prepared me for this level of insanity. "Hey!" I shouted as I burst through my back door. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The crew foreman, a stocky guy with a sun-weathered face, looked up from his clipboard with a confused expression. "We're installing the fence, sir, according to the work order." "Work order?" "I didn't authorize any fence. This is my property." He shuffled through some papers and pulled out a document. "Says here the Homeowners Association approved this installation for 2847 Desert Willow Drive. That's this address, right?" My hands were shaking as I grabbed the paper from him. The document had the official Saguaro Springs HOA letterhead at the top, complete with their pretentious logo of a cactus wrapped in a laurel wreath. The order was signed by Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president, and dated from 2 weeks ago. According to the description, the fence was being installed to correct property line disputes and maintain community standards. "There is no property line dispute," I said, my voice getting louder. "I had my property surveyed when I bought this house. My boundaries are clearly marked and this fence is completely inside my legal property line." The foreman held up his hands defensively. "Look, man, I just install what I'm told to install. You need to take this up with whoever ordered it. We're just doing our job." "Then stop doing your job until this gets sorted out." "Can't do that. We've got a contract with the HOA. If you've got a problem, call them." He turned back to his crew and made a hand gesture. "Keep going, guys." I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed the HOA office number that I'd saved for emergencies. This definitely qualified as an emergency. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Saguaro Springs Homeowners Association. This is Deborah speaking." "Deborah, this is Marcus Ingram at 2847 Desert Willow. There's a construction crew in my backyard right now installing a fence that I never approved. I need someone to stop this immediately." "Let me check our records, Mr. Ingram." I heard the clicking of a keyboard. "Yes, I see the work order here. The fence installation was approved by the board 2 weeks ago. You should have received notification in the mail." "I received nothing. And even if you sent something, you can't just install a fence on my property without my permission." "Actually, Mr. Ingram, according to Section 12.7 of the HOA bylaws, the association has the right to make improvements to common areas and to enforce property modifications that serve the community interest. This isn't a common area. This is my private backyard. I'm going to transfer you to Mrs. Hendricks. Please hold." The hold music was some awful instrumental version of a pop song that made me want to throw my phone. I watched helplessly as the construction crew continued driving posts into my lawn. They'd already installed about 30 feet of fencing, and they were working fast. Each metallic clang of their post driver felt like a personal assault. "This is Patricia Hendricks." The voice that came through was crisp, authoritative, and dripping with the kind of condescension that only comes from someone who spent too long in a small position of power. "Mrs. Hendricks, this is Marcus Ingram. Your construction crew is installing a fence through my backyard without my permission. This needs to stop right now." "Mr. Ingram, yes, I'm aware of the situation. The fence is being installed to correct a long-standing issue with property usage in your section of the neighborhood." "What issue?" "My property is perfectly maintained. I follow all the HOA rules. The board has determined that your use of the eastern portion of your lot has been inconsistent with community standards. The fence will help delineate appropriate usage zones." I felt like I was having a stroke. Usage zones. "Are you serious? This is my property. I own it. I have a deed. Mr. Ingram, I understand you're upset, but the decision has been made. The fence stays. I suggest you review your HOA agreement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another meeting." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at my phone in disbelief. A crew was literally building a fence through my yard, cutting off access to half my property, and the HOA president had just dismissed me like I was a child complaining about bedtime. The rage building in my chest was unlike anything I'd felt in years. I called my real estate attorney, Jennifer Morrison, who'd handled my house purchase. Her assistant said she was in court but would call me back within the hour. That wasn't good enough. I needed action now. Walking back outside, I approached the foreman again. "I'm telling you officially that I do not consent to this construction. If you continue, I'll consider it trespassing and property damage. Like I said, take it up with the HOA. We've got our orders." "Fine. Then I'm calling the police." That made him pause. "The police? Come on, man. We're just doing a job. And I'm just protecting my property." I dialed 911, then thought better of it and looked up the non-emergency number for the Scottsdale Police Department instead. This wasn't exactly a life-threatening emergency, but it was definitely a crime in progress as far as I was concerned. The dispatcher was professional but skeptical. "Sir, if this is a civil dispute with your HOA, the police may not be able to intervene. Someone is on my property building a structure without my permission. How is that not trespassing? I'll send an officer to assess the situation. Please stay calm and don't attempt to physically stop the construction crew." 2 patrol officers arrived about 20 minutes later. By that time, the fence had extended another 20 feet. The officers, one older guy with gray hair and a younger woman who looked fresh out of the academy, listened to my explanation while examining the work order. "Mr. Ingram, this appears to be a civil matter between you and your HOA," the older officer said. "We can't force them to stop construction based on a dispute over interpretation of HOA rules. But it's my property. Do you have documentation showing this fence violates your property boundaries?" "I have my property survey inside." "Then my suggestion is to get a lawyer and file for an injunction. That's really your only legal recourse here. Unless they're violating criminal law, we can't stop them from working." The younger officer added, "You could also call the city's code enforcement office. They might be able to help if there's a permit issue." After the police left, I felt deflated and furious at the same time. I went inside and dug out my property survey from my file cabinet. The document clearly showed my property boundaries, and the fence was definitely inside my legal lot line by at least 15 feet on the eastern side. This wasn't even a close call. The HOA was blatantly installing a fence on my private property. Jennifer Morrison called me back around 11. I explained the situation in detail, and I could hear her taking notes. Marcus, this is outrageous but unfortunately not uncommon. Some HOAs have become incredibly aggressive about asserting authority they don't actually have. Here's what we need to do. First, I'm going to draft a cease and desist letter and have it couriered to the HOA office and the construction company today. Second, I'm going to file for an emergency temporary restraining order. We should be able to get a hearing within 48 hours. What do I do in the meantime? They're still out there building this thing. Document everything. Take photos, videos, measurements. Get copies of any communication from the HOA. And do not, under any circumstances, physically interfere with the construction. That could create legal problems for you. So I just have to watch them destroy my property. For now, yes. I know it's frustrating, but trust me, we'll have a much stronger case if you don't do anything that could be construed as aggressive or illegal. I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything. I took probably 300 photos from every angle. I measured the fence line's distance from my property boundaries. I dug out every piece of paper the HOA had ever sent me, looking for any mention of this fence project. There was nothing. Not a single word about any planned construction. The crew finished around 4 in the afternoon. They'd installed a complete fence running east to west across my backyard, essentially cutting my usable yard space by 40%. The fence was ugly too. A basic chain link style with metal posts and that galvanized silver color that screamed industrial. It completely clashed with the desert landscaping aesthetic that every other property in the neighborhood maintained. After they left, I walked the fence line, feeling sick to my stomach. My fire pit was on the other side now, completely inaccessible unless I wanted to climb the fence. Same with my vegetable garden, where I'd planted tomatoes, peppers, and herbs just a month ago. The irrigation system I'd installed was now split between both sides of the fence, which would make maintenance a nightmare. That evening, my girlfriend Michelle came over after work. She was a paralegal at a corporate law firm downtown, and I'd been texting her updates throughout the day. When she saw the fence, her jaw literally dropped. "Oh my God, I thought you were exaggerating. This is insane. Tell me about it." I've been staring at it all day and it still doesn't seem real. We sat on my back patio with beers, looking at the monstrosity dividing my yard. Michelle, who was usually the calm, rational voice in our relationship, was genuinely angry on my behalf. "What did your lawyer say?" "She's filing for a restraining order. Hearing should be in the next day or two." "Good, because this is illegal. They can't just build on your property." Apparently, they think they can. Patricia Hendricks acted like I was the crazy one for objecting. Michelle shook her head. "I've heard nightmare stories about HOAs, but this is next level. What's their justification? Something about property usage zones and community standards. It's complete nonsense." "Have you checked the HOA bylaws? Like, actually read through them." I read them when I bought the house. Standard stuff about lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, no commercial vehicles parked in driveways. Nothing about the association having the right to build fences on private property. You should read them again. There might be some obscure clause they're misinterpreting or trying to abuse. She was right. After she left around 9, I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop. The document was 63 pages of dense legal language that would put an insomniac to sleep, but I forced myself to read every word. Section 12.7, which Deborah had mentioned on the phone, dealt with common area improvements. The key phrase was common areas. which were explicitly defined as parks, playgrounds, the community pool, and the shared walking paths. Private property wasn't mentioned at all. I found another section, 15.3, that discussed architectural modifications. It stated that homeowners must get HOA approval before making certain changes to their property's exterior. But again, this was about homeowners making changes, not the HOA making changes to homeowner property. There was absolutely nothing in the bylaws that gave the HOA authority to install a fence on my land. I slept terribly that night, tossing and turning while my mind raced through various scenarios and revenge fantasies. Around 3 in the morning, I had a thought that made me sit up in bed. If the HOA could just build whatever they wanted on my property, what was to stop me from removing it? The fence was on my land. The materials were on my land. Legally speaking, weren't they now my materials? The next morning, I called Jennifer before she got into her office. I've been thinking about this all night. If that fence is on my property, don't I have the right to remove it? Marcus, I know where you're going with this, and I strongly advise against it. Yes, technically, they've built a structure on your property without permission. But if you tear it down before we get a court order, the HOA will claim you're the aggressor. They'll probably try to fine you or even sue you for the cost of the fence. But it's my property, I know, and we're going to prove that in court. Just give me 2 days to get this in front of a judge. Can you wait 2 days? I agreed reluctantly. Jennifer sent over the cease and desist letter around noon, and she confirmed that the emergency TRO filing was submitted to the Maricopa County Superior Court. We should hear back by Thursday at the latest. Wednesday morning, I woke up to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from the HOA, informing me that I was being fined $500 for unauthorized removal of community improvement structures. I hadn't removed anything. The notice went on to say that any interference with HOA projects would result in additional fines of $500 per day, plus potential legal action. This was pure intimidation, and it made my blood boil. I photographed the notice and sent it to Jennifer immediately. She called me back within minutes. This is actually good for us. They're admitting in writing that they installed the fence, and they're threatening you with fines for something you haven't even done yet. This shows a pattern of overreach and harassment. I'm adding this to our filing. When's the hearing? Tomorrow afternoon at 2, Judge Catherine Riley. I've appeared before her a few times. She's fair but no nonsense. Make sure you bring all your documentation. That Wednesday felt like the longest day of my life. I worked from home, my home office window facing the backyard, so I had a constant view of that ridiculous fence. I kept thinking about Jennifer's advice to wait for the court order, but another part of me wanted to just go out there with bolt cutters and a sledgehammer and tear the whole thing down. Around 3 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang. I answered it to find Patricia Hendricks standing on my porch with 2 other people I recognized from HOA meetings. Patricia was exactly what you'd expect. Mid-50s, severe bob haircut, wearing a business casual outfit that looked like she'd bought it specifically to intimidate people at HOA meetings. Her companions were Robert Chen, the HOA treasurer, and Linda Matthews, the secretary. Mr. Ingram, we need to discuss this situation, Patricia said without any greeting or pleasantries. I have nothing to discuss with you. My lawyer is handling this. That's unfortunate. We were hoping to resolve this amicably. You installed a fence through my backyard without permission. What part of that is amicable? Robert stepped forward. He was younger than Patricia, probably early 40s, and seemed less confrontational. Marcus, the board's position is that the fence is necessary for community organization. We've had complaints about various properties and we're implementing new standards. Complaints about my property. From who? That's confidential, Patricia interjected. But multiple residents have expressed concerns about the eastern section of your lot. What concerns? I maintain everything perfectly. I've never gotten a violation notice. Linda, a thin woman with oversized glasses, pulled out a tablet and started reading. Complaints include excessive water usage, non-native plant species, and aesthetic inconsistencies with the neighborhood character. That's complete garbage. I have drought-resistant landscaping. My garden uses recycled water, and aesthetic inconsistencies. Half the neighborhood has completely different styles. Patricia's expression hardened. Mr. Ingram, the decision has been made. The fence stays. If you attempt to remove it, you'll be fined according to the schedule outlined in our notice. Additionally, the HOA will pursue legal action to recover costs and damages. I'll see you in court tomorrow then. Excuse me. My lawyer filed for an emergency restraining order. We have a hearing tomorrow at 2. I'd suggest you bring your attorney. For the first time, Patricia looked uncertain. Robert and Linda exchanged worried glances. Patricia recovered quickly, though, straightening her posture and lifting her chin. Fine. The HOA will be represented. But I assure you, we're well within our rights. They turned and left without another word. I called Jennifer immediately and told her about the confrontation. She was pleased that I'd stood my ground without saying anything that could hurt our case. The fact that they came to your house suggests they're worried, she said. They know they're on shaky legal ground. Tomorrow's hearing should go well for us. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about what Patricia had said about complaints. Who would complain about my property? I got along fine with my neighbors. Sure, I wasn't best friends with everyone on the street, but there'd never been any conflicts. I decided to do some investigating. My next-door neighbor to the east was Tom Brennan, a retired firefighter who spent most of his time working on vintage cars in his garage. I walked over and found him under the hood of a 1967 Mustang. Hey, Tom. Got a minute? Sure, Marcus. What's up? He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. Did you hear about the fence the HOA installed in my backyard? I saw the construction crew yesterday. That was for your place. I thought maybe you were putting in a dog run or something. No, I didn't authorize it. The HOA did it without my permission. They claim there were complaints about my property. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Tom frowned. Complaints? About what? Your place always looks great, better than most of the neighborhood, honestly. That's what I thought. The HOA says people complained about the eastern part of my lot, but they won't tell me who or specifically what the complaints were. That's ridiculous. I've never heard anyone say a negative word about your property. Hell, I've used your yard as an example when my wife wants me to do more landscaping. He paused. You think the HOA is making it up, starting to seem that way. I talked to 3 other neighbors that evening. None of them had any complaints about my property, and all of them were shocked to hear about the fence. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, even said she'd received a random survey call from the HOA a few weeks ago, asking general questions about neighborhood satisfaction, but nothing specific about any property. This was clearly a manufactured justification. The HOA had decided to install this fence for some reason, then invented complaints to legitimize it after the fact. But why? What possible benefit did they get from dividing my backyard? Thursday morning arrived with typical Arizona sunshine, the temperature already climbing into the 80s by 9. I dressed in business casual, khakis and a button-down shirt, and gathered all my documentation into a folder. Jennifer had told me to arrive at the courthouse by 1:30, so we could review everything before the hearing. The Maricopa County Superior Court was downtown, a modern building with tight security. After going through the metal detectors, I met Jennifer in the lobby. She looked sharp in a navy suit, her briefcase bulging with documents. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Nervous, angry, ready to get this over with." "Good. Channel that into clear, factual testimony. Judge Riley doesn't like emotional outbursts, but she respects property rights." Our case is solid. We went up to the courtroom on the 4th floor. The HOA was already there. Patricia Hendricks, Robert Chen, and their attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Douglas Whitmore. He had that corporate lawyer vibe, all confidence and rehearsed charm. "Miss Morrison," he said, shaking Jennifer's hand, "I've reviewed your filing. I think there's been a simple misunderstanding that we can clear up quickly." "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Whitmore. Your clients built a fence on my client's property without permission or legal authority. The HOA has broad discretion under the governing documents to make improvements that serve the community interest. Not on private property, they don't. Judge Riley's bailiff called us in at 2:05. The judge was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She reviewed the filings while we all stood, then gestured for everyone to sit. "Let's make this efficient," Judge Riley said. "Mr. Whitmore, explain to me under what authority your clients installed a fence on Mr. Ingram's property." Douglas stood. "Your Honor, the Saguaro Springs HOA operates under comprehensive bylaws that give the board authority to maintain community standards and make improvements that benefit all residents. The fence in question was installed to address ongoing disputes about property usage and to clearly delineate appropriate zones within the community. Has there been a survey showing the fence is on common property?" "No, Your Honor, but the board's position is that the eastern portion of Mr. Ingram's lot has been subject to usage patterns that warranted intervention." "That's not an answer to my question. Is the fence on Mr. Ingram's private property or on HOA common property?" Douglas hesitated. "It's on Mr. Ingram's deeded property, but within an area that the board has determined should be subject to enhanced oversight." Judge Riley's expression suggested she was not impressed. "Miss Morrison," Jennifer stood, "Your Honor, this is a clear case of overreach. The HOA installed a fence that's entirely within my client's property boundaries, as documented by the official survey we've submitted. There's no provision in the HOA bylaws that gives them authority to build structures on private property. The so-called complaints they cite as justification have no documentation, no specificity, and appear to be fabricated." "Your Honor," Douglas interrupted, "the HOA has acted in good faith based on legitimate community concerns. Mr. Whitmore, I've read the bylaws. I see nothing that gives your clients the right to build fences on private property without the owner's consent. Do you have any case law supporting your position? The HOA's authority is derived from the collective interest of the community, Your Honor. Courts have consistently upheld HOA authority to enforce standards. To enforce standards on homeowners who violate rules, yes, not to unilaterally build structures on private land. Mr. Ingram, has the HOA cited you for any violations?" I stood. "No, Your Honor. I've never received a violation notice in 6 years of living there." Judge Riley removed her glasses and leaned back. "Here's my ruling. The HOA clearly exceeded its authority. Mr. Whitmore, your clients are to remove the fence within 7 days at their own expense and restore Mr. Ingram's property to its original condition. If they fail to do so, Mr. Ingram is authorized to remove the fence himself and may seek damages for the cost of removal plus compensation for property damage and inconvenience. Additionally, the HOA is enjoined from any further construction or modification on Mr. Ingram's property without his express written consent. Are we clear? Douglas's face had gone pale. Your Honor, 7 days may not be sufficient to arrange removal. Then I suggest you work quickly. This is a temporary restraining order. I'm scheduling a full hearing for 3 weeks from now to determine if a permanent injunction is warranted and to address Mr. Ingram's potential claims for damages. Anything else? No, Your Honor, Jennifer said, unable to hide her smile. We left the courtroom with Patricia Hendricks glaring daggers at me. In the hallway, Douglas pulled Jennifer aside for a hushed conversation while I waited with my folder of documentation that had barely been needed. Jennifer came back a minute later. They want to settle. They'll remove the fence immediately and pay you $2,000 for the inconvenience. What about the fines they threatened me with? Withdrawn completely. They'll put it in writing. I thought about it. $2,000 was decent, but it didn't really address the principle of what they'd done. What happens if we go to the full hearing? You could potentially win more in damages, but it'll take time and create more stress. It's your call. Tell them no settlement, I want the full hearing. I want it on record that what they did was wrong. Jennifer nodded approvingly. I was hoping you'd say that. The 7 days came and went. The HOA did not remove the fence. On day 8, I called Jennifer, and she confirmed that this meant I was legally authorized under Judge Riley's order to remove the fence myself. That was all I needed to hear. I went to Home Depot that afternoon and rented a heavy-duty reciprocating saw, a post puller, and some other tools. I also bought heavy gloves, safety glasses, and a utility trailer that attached to my truck. If the HOA wasn't going to clean up their mess, I'd do it myself and keep every bit of material as compensation for my trouble. Friday morning, I started work at 7. The chain-link fence was surprisingly easy to dismantle once you knew what you were doing. I'd watched some YouTube videos the night before to learn the basics. The fence fabric was attached to the posts with metal ties that could be cut with bolt cutters. Once I removed the fabric, the posts came out with the post puller, though some required significant effort and digging. It was physical work, and the Arizona sun wasn't making it any easier, but there was something deeply satisfying about tearing down this symbol of HOA overreach. Each post I yanked out of the ground felt like a small victory. I worked steadily through the morning, taking breaks to hydrate and catch my breath. Around 10, Tom from next door came over with a cooler of cold drinks. Need any help? I wouldn't say no to an extra set of hands. Tom pitched in, and with 2 of us working, the pace picked up considerably. By noon, we'd removed about half the fence. The materials were piling up on my driveway: posts, chain-link fabric, bags of concrete that had been around some of the posts. It was a substantial amount of stuff, and I was already calculating its value. Chain-link fencing wasn't cheap. That's when Patricia Hendricks showed up. She came marching across my lawn like a general inspecting troops, her face red with anger. What do you think you're doing? I'm removing the fence from my property, exactly as authorized by Judge Riley's order. That fence is HOA property. You're stealing. I pulled out a folded copy of the court order from my back pocket. According to this, the fence is on my property and the HOA failed to remove it within the required time frame. Therefore, I'm authorized to remove it and seek compensation. The materials are now mine to offset my costs and damages. This is theft. I'm calling the police. Go ahead. I'll show them the same court order. Patricia actually did call the police. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later, the same ones who'd responded to my initial call. The older officer recognized me immediately. "Mr. Ingram, didn't expect to be back here so soon." "Hi, officer. Sorry to drag you into this again." Patricia immediately started talking. "Officers, this man is dismantling HOA property. He's stealing materials that don't belong to him." I handed the court order to the officer. He read it carefully, his partner looking over his shoulder. "Madam, this order from Judge Riley clearly authorizes Mr. Ingram to remove the fence. It says the HOA was supposed to do it within 7 days, and since that deadline passed, he can do it himself. But those materials belong to the HOA. The materials were on his property. According to this order, he can seek compensation for costs and damages. This is a civil matter, but it looks like Mr. Ingram is acting within his legal rights." "This is outrageous." The younger officer turned to Patricia. "Madam, you need to leave Mr. Ingram's property. If you continue to interfere with his authorized activities, we'll have to cite you for trespassing." Patricia looked like she might explode, but she turned and stalked back to her car. Before driving off, she rolled down her window and shouted, "The HOA will sue you for every penny those materials are worth." "Looking forward to it," I called back. The officers left, and Tom and I got back to work. By 4 in the afternoon, the entire fence was dismantled. My backyard looked torn up from all the post holes and disturbed dirt, but the barrier was gone. My fire pit was accessible again. My garden was back in one piece. The irrigation system could be repaired. It felt like a massive weight had been lifted. The pile of materials on my driveway was impressive. 42 metal posts, roughly 200 linear feet of chain link fabric, 3 bags of quick-set concrete, various hardware and brackets. I loaded everything onto the trailer and into my truck bed. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with it all, but it was mine now. Over the next week, I worked on restoring my backyard. I filled in the post holes with topsoil, reseeded the damaged grass, and repaired the irrigation lines that had been cut during the fence installation. The work was tedious but therapeutic. Every shovelful of dirt felt like I was erasing the HOA's violation of my property. Jennifer kept me updated on the legal proceedings. The HOA had responded to our complaint with a counterclaim, alleging that I'd stolen their property and damaged community infrastructure. It was absurd, but we had to respond to it formally. Jennifer was confident their counterclaim would be dismissed. The hearing was scheduled for late June. In the meantime, I got several letters from the HOA claiming I owed them for the fencing materials, totaling $3,500. Each letter threatened legal action if I didn't pay within 30 days. I forwarded them all to Jennifer, who sent back formal responses citing the court order and my right to compensation. Something interesting happened about 2 weeks after I removed the fence. I received a letter, not from the HOA, but from a resident named Gary Martinez who lived 4 streets over. He wrote that he'd heard about my situation through neighborhood gossip and wanted to share his own experience with the HOA. Patricia Hendricks had cited him for having a non-conforming mailbox and demanded he replace it with an approved style at his own expense within 10 days or face daily fines. When he'd pushed back and researched the bylaws, he discovered that the mailbox requirement Patricia cited didn't actually exist in the governing documents. She'd made it up. Gary's letter included copies of his correspondence with the HOA, showing a pattern of Patricia inventing rules and threatening homeowners who questioned her authority. He'd eventually replaced his mailbox just to avoid the hassle, but he'd been angry about it ever since. He urged me to fight the HOA and offered to testify if needed. I called Gary that evening, and we talked for over an hour. It turned out Patricia Hendricks had been HOA president for 4 years and had become increasingly authoritarian. Several homeowners had been fined for violations that weren't actually in the bylaws. Others had been pressured into making expensive modifications to their properties based on Patricia's personal aesthetic preferences rather than any written rules. Why hasn't anyone challenged her before? I asked. Most people just pay the fines or make the changes because it's easier than fighting, Gary said. The HOA has money for lawyers. Individual homeowners usually don't, and Patricia is relentless. She'll make your life miserable if you oppose her. Well, she picked the wrong person this time. I'm seeing this through to the end. Gary connected me with 3 other homeowners who'd had similar experiences. I spent the next few days collecting their stories and documentation. The pattern was clear. Patricia Hendricks was running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, abusing her authority to bully homeowners into compliance with rules she'd invented. Jennifer was thrilled when I brought her this information. This is perfect. It establishes a pattern of behavior that goes way beyond your fence. It shows systematic abuse of authority. This could turn into a much bigger case. The full hearing finally arrived on June 23rd. Jennifer and I showed up with 3 large binders full of documentation. My property survey, photos of the fence installation and removal, copies of all correspondence with the HOA, Judge Riley's temporary order, and statements from Gary Martinez and 2 other homeowners about their experiences with Patricia Hendricks. The HOA brought Douglas Whitmore again, plus Patricia, Robert, and Linda. They also had a structural engineer who'd prepared a report about the fence installation, though I couldn't imagine what purpose it served since the issue wasn't whether the fence was properly built, but whether they had any right to build it in the first place. Judge Riley took the bench and reviewed her notes from the previous hearing. I see the fence has been removed. Mr. Whitmore, did your clients comply with my order? Your Honor, the fence was removed but not by the HOA. Mr. Ingram took it upon himself to dismantle it and keep the materials, which we contend is theft. Your clients failed to remove it within the 7-day deadline I specified. My order explicitly stated that Mr. Ingram could remove it himself if the HOA didn't comply. How is that theft? The materials were HOA property, Your Honor. Mr. Ingram should have stored them and returned them, not kept them for his own use. Judge Riley looked at me. Mr. Ingram, what have you done with the materials? They're stored in my garage and on my property, Your Honor. I haven't sold them or disposed of them. I'm keeping them as compensation for my time, labor, and damages, as authorized by your order. That seems reasonable. Miss Morrison, what are you seeking in this hearing? Jennifer stood. Your Honor, we're asking for a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from any unauthorized construction on Mr. Ingram's property. We're also seeking damages in the amount of $5,000 to compensate for Mr. Ingram's time, labor, property damage, and emotional distress. Additionally, we're requesting attorney's fees. Your Honor, Douglas interjected, $5,000 is excessive for a fence that was installed in good faith based on community concerns. Good faith? Jennifer's voice rose slightly. Your Honor, we've discovered that this was part of a pattern of behavior by the HOA president. We have documentation showing that Miss Hendricks has repeatedly exceeded her authority, invented rules that don't exist in the bylaws, and threatened homeowners who question her decisions. This wasn't good faith. This was abuse of power. Judge Riley looked interested. Go on. Jennifer presented the statements from Gary Martinez and the other homeowners. She walked through each case, showing how Patricia had cited violations that weren't in the bylaws, threatened fines without proper authority, and generally operated as if the HOA rules were whatever she said they were at any given moment. Douglas tried to object, arguing that these other cases weren't relevant to my fence situation, but Judge Riley overruled him. These cases go directly to the question of whether the HOA acted in good faith, Mr. Whitmore. I'm allowing it. Patricia Hendricks looked increasingly uncomfortable as Jennifer methodically dismantled the HOA's position. When Judge Riley asked if she wanted to testify in her own defense, Patricia declined, which probably wasn't a smart move. The hearing lasted almost 3 hours. By the end, Judge Riley had heard enough. Here's my ruling. The HOA clearly and egregiously exceeded its authority by installing a fence on Mr. Ingram's private property. The so-called complaints about his property usage were never properly documented and appear to have been pretextual at best. Furthermore, the evidence suggests a pattern of behavior by the HOA president that goes well beyond zealous enforcement and into the realm of abuse of authority. I'm granting a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from any construction, modification, or physical alteration of Mr. Ingram's property without his express written consent. I'm awarding Mr. Ingram $4,000 in damages, to be paid by the HOA within 30 days. I'm also awarding reasonable attorney's fees, to be calculated by Miss Morrison and submitted within 14 days. As for the fencing materials, Mr. Ingram may keep them as additional compensation for his time and labor in removing the fence. The HOA's counterclaim is dismissed with prejudice. Finally, I'm ordering the HOA to send written notice to all homeowners in the Saguaro Springs community, informing them that any previous citations or fines based on rules not explicitly stated in the recorded bylaws are void and unenforceable. Douglas started to object, but Judge Riley cut him off. I'm not finished, Mr. Whitmore. I'm also recommending that the HOA board review Ms. Hendricks' continued service as president. The behavior documented in this case suggests she may not be suitable for a leadership position that requires judgment and restraint. That's a recommendation, not an order, but I strongly encourage the board to take it seriously. We're adjourned. The gavel came down and I felt like I could finally breathe again. Jennifer was grinning as she packed up her materials. Douglas and the HOA representatives left quickly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Outside the courthouse, Jennifer shook my hand. That went as well as we could have hoped. Judge Riley was clearly appalled by their behavior. What happens now? They'll pay the damages and attorney's fees, or we'll put a lien on HOA assets. That notice to homeowners is huge. It essentially invalidates every bogus fine or citation Patricia has issued. This could create a lot of problems for the HOA if other homeowners start demanding refunds. Good. They deserve it. Over the next month, several things happened. The HOA paid the $4,000 in damages and Jennifer's attorney's fees, which came to another $3,200. The community notice went out, and I heard through Gary Martinez that dozens of homeowners immediately started challenging previous fines and citations. The HOA was suddenly dealing with a revolt. More importantly, a group of homeowners called for a special election to remove Patricia Hendricks as president. The bylaws allowed this if 20% of homeowners signed a petition, and they got there easily. The election was scheduled for late August. Michelle and I went to that election meeting, partly out of curiosity and partly because I wanted to see Patricia face the consequences of her actions. The community center was packed with over 100 residents, an unprecedented turnout for an HOA meeting. Patricia sat at the head table looking defiant and angry, while Robert and Linda looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. The meeting was contentious. Homeowner after homeowner stood up to share their experiences with Patricia's overreach. One woman had been fined for planting roses that were supposedly the wrong shade of pink. A man had been cited for parking his work van in his driveway overnight, even though the bylaws only prohibited commercial vehicles over a certain size, and his van was well under the limit. Another family had been pressured into repainting their entire house because Patricia decided their beige was too yellow. Patricia tried to defend herself, arguing that she'd only been maintaining standards and that people were overreacting. But her support had evaporated. Even Robert and Linda, who'd stood by her during my fence dispute, were silent. The vote wasn't even close. Patricia Hendricks was removed as HOA president by a margin of 87-12. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out without a word. I never saw her at another HOA meeting again. The new president was a retired accountant named David Foster who promised transparency, strict adherence to the actual bylaws, and no more invented rules. One of his first acts was to review every citation and fine issued in the previous 2 years and refund money to homeowners who'd been charged for non-existent violations. The HOA had to take out a short-term loan to cover all the refunds, but David said it was necessary to restore trust. As for the fence materials, I ended up donating most of them to a local charity that built community gardens in underserved neighborhoods. They were thrilled to get the chain link and posts, which they used to secure a garden site in South Phoenix. I kept a few pieces as souvenirs of the whole ridiculous experience. Michelle and I were having dinner one evening in late September when she asked if I had any regrets about how I'd handled everything. "Not really," I said. "I mean, it was stressful and time-consuming, but someone needed to stand up to Patricia. If I just rolled over and accepted that fence, she'd have kept abusing her power. You probably saved a lot of your neighbors from future harassment. That's how I look at it. Plus, I got a good story out of it. And $4,000. That too." The next HOA meeting I attended was in October, and it was like night and day compared to the Patricia Hendricks era. David Foster ran the meeting efficiently, stuck to the actual bylaws, and treated homeowners with respect. When someone had a question or concern, he addressed it professionally instead of dismissing it. There were no threats, no invented rules, no intimidation. Gary Martinez came up to me after the meeting. "You started something, you know. The whole neighborhood is different now. I just didn't want a fence in my backyard." "Yeah, but you fought back when most people would have given up. That inspired others to speak up." Patricia had been getting away with her nonsense for years because nobody challenged her. You changed that. It was gratifying to hear. Even though I hadn't set out to lead some kind of HOA revolution, I just wanted my property back. One interesting footnote. About 3 months after the election, Patricia Hendricks put her house up for sale. According to neighborhood gossip, she couldn't handle the embarrassment of being removed as president and publicly rebuked for her behavior. Her house sold quickly, and she moved to some retirement community in Sun City. I can only imagine what that HOA is like with her as a resident instead of the president. My backyard fully recovered from the fence installation and removal. The grass grew back thick and green where I'd receded. The irrigation system worked perfectly after repairs. My vegetable garden had a fantastic fall harvest, with tomatoes and peppers thriving in the October weather. The fire pit became the site of regular gatherings with Michelle and friends, and I always made sure to tell the fence story to anyone who hadn't heard it. The following spring, I decided to do some additional landscaping in the area where the fence had been. I installed a flagstone pathway that wound through the eastern section of my yard, with drought-resistant plants and decorative rocks on either side. It looked beautiful, and was the kind of improvement I'd always wanted to make but had put off. The whole fence incident had reconnected me with my property, and reminded me why I'd bought the house in the first place. In May, almost exactly a year after the fence incident, the new HOA board sent out a newsletter highlighting positive changes in the community. They mentioned the special election, the refund program for improper fines, and the new commitment to transparency. They also included a section about property rights, emphasizing that homeowners had control over their own land, and that the HOA's role was to maintain common areas and enforce legitimate, documented rules, not to micromanage private property. Jennifer Morrison and I stayed in touch. She said my case had become something of a legend in local real estate law circles, an example of successful pushback against HOA overreach. She'd been contacted by several other homeowners in different communities dealing with similar issues, and she used my case as a template for how to fight back effectively. Michelle and I got engaged that summer. We'd been dating for 3 years, and the fence incident had actually strengthened our relationship in weird ways. She'd supported me through the stress and frustration, and I'd appreciated her legal knowledge and calm perspective. We decided to stay in my house rather than look for a new place, partly because I loved the property and partly because I'd literally fought for every square foot of it. The engagement party was in my backyard, of course, with the fire pit blazing and friends and neighbors filling the space where that ridiculous fence had once stood. Tom Brennan, who'd helped me tear down the fence, gave a toast about standing up for what's right. Gary Martinez made a joke about HOA horror stories. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses, standing there with Michelle, looking around at the yard I'd reclaimed and the community that had found its voice. I felt genuinely happy. The fence incident had been frustrating and infuriating, but it had also been empowering. I'd learned that property rights matter, that abusive authority should be challenged, and that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours. David Foster, the new HOA president, stopped by the engagement party briefly. He shook my hand and thanked me for everything I'd done. "You know, Marcus, the HOA is supposed to make the neighborhood better, not worse. Patricia forgot that. You reminded all of us what these associations should actually be about." "I just wanted my backyard back," I said, which got a laugh. "Well, you got it, and you gave the rest of us a better community in the process." As the party continued into the evening, I thought about that first morning when I'd woken up to construction equipment in my yard. I'd been furious and helpless, watching strangers install a fence that made no sense. But I'd fought back, documented everything, hired a good lawyer, and stood my ground. The HOA had backed down, Patricia had lost her position, and the community had reformed itself. The materials from that fence, or at least the ones I'd donated, were now protecting a community garden where kids learned to grow vegetables. The rest had been recycled or repurposed. The fence itself was gone, but its impact remained in the form of a stronger, more accountable HOA and a neighborhood that wouldn't tolerate abusive authority. Michelle squeezed my hand as we watched the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple. No regrets, not a single one. The fire pit crackled, friends laughed and talked around us, and my backyard, whole and undivided, stretched out in every direction. It was mine, earned not just through a mortgage and a deed, but through standing up when it mattered. The fence was gone, but the principles it represented had left their mark on me and everyone in Saguaro Springs. Sometimes you have to tear down barriers to see clearly. Sometimes you have to fight for space that should have been yours all along. And sometimes, when a HOA installs a fence through your backyard without permission, the only reasonable response is to tear it down, keep the materials, and refuse to back down until justice is served. That's exactly what I did, and I do it again without hesitation. The neighborhood learned an important lesson that year. Homeowners associations serve at the pleasure of homeowners, not the other way around. When HOA leadership forgets that basic truth, residents have both the right and the responsibility to push back. My fence might have been torn down and donated to charity, but the precedent it set remained standing, a reminder that property rights matter and that ordinary people can successfully challenge institutional overreach when they have the courage to do so. As autumn approached again and the anniversary of the fence's removal came and went, I sometimes walked the line where it had stood. The grass showed no trace of those metal posts. The irrigation system worked perfectly. My fire pit and garden were exactly where they belonged, accessible and useful. It was as if the fence had never existed, except in memory and in the legal precedent that would protect other homeowners from similar violations. Life in Saguaro Springs continued, calmer and more respectful under David Foster's leadership. The HOA focused on actual community improvements, updating the playground equipment, repairing walking paths, organizing neighborhood events that brought people together instead of threatening them apart. It was what the association should have been all along. I kept the court documents in a file cabinet, not because I expected to need them again, but as a reminder. Judge Riley's permanent injunction, the damage award, the attorney's fee calculation, all of it documented the moment when one homeowner said no and made it stick. Those papers represented more than a legal victory. They represented the principle that your home is your castle, your property is your domain, and no association, no matter how official it sounds, has the right to violate those boundaries without facing consequences. The story spread beyond Saguaro Springs. Other HOAs in the Phoenix area heard about what happened, and according to David Foster, several boards had discussions about their own policies and whether they were overreaching. Some associations actually revised their bylaws to make property rights protections more explicit. My fence dispute had inadvertently started a small movement toward HOA accountability. On quiet evenings when Michelle and I sat by the fire pit with glasses of wine, we sometimes talked about that crazy period when a fence divided our lives into before and after. The stress, the anger, the courtroom drama, it all seemed distant now, like something that had happened to different people. But we both knew it had shaped us, strengthened us, and taught us that fighting for what's right is always worth the effort. The materials from the fence served their purpose in the end. Instead of dividing my property, they helped create community gardens where they divided nothing except garden plots for families who wanted to grow fresh vegetables. Instead of representing overreach and abuse, they became tools for empowerment and self-sufficiency. That transformation felt appropriate, like the universe had corrected an error and turned something negative into something positive. As winter approached and the Phoenix weather turned mild and pleasant, I finally finished the last of my backyard renovations. The eastern section, where the fence had cut through, now featured the most beautiful landscaping on my entire property. Native plants, carefully arranged rocks, the flagstone pathway, and accent lighting created a space that was both functional and artistic. Every time I looked at it, I felt pride, not just in the design but in what it represented. Reclaimed space, defended rights, and the refusal to accept injustice. The HOA never bothered me again about anything, and I followed the rules scrupulously, not out of fear, but out of respect for David Foster's reasonable leadership. When the association proposed actual improvements to common areas, I voted in favor and even volunteered for the neighborhood cleanup day. I believed in community and cooperation, just not in tyranny disguised as governance. Michelle and I set our wedding date for the following spring, planning an outdoor ceremony in our backyard where the fence had stood. It seemed fitting to celebrate our future in the space I'd fought to protect. The guest list included neighbors who'd supported me, Gary Martinez and the other homeowners who'd shared their Patricia Hendricks stories, Jennifer Morrison, who'd fought the legal battle, and even Tom Brennan, who'd helped me tear down that fence on a hot Arizona morning that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Looking back on everything that had happened, I realized the fence had been a blessing in disguise. Without it, I never would have discovered the extent of HOA abuse in our community. Patricia Hendricks would have continued her authoritarian reign. Dozens of homeowners would have kept paying bogus fines and following invented rules. The community would have remained cowed and frustrated, accepting mistreatment because fighting back seemed impossible. One fence, illegally installed and rightfully torn down, had changed all of that. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance have the biggest ripples. Sometimes standing up for your own backyard means standing up for everyone's rights. And sometimes, keeping the materials from a fence you tore down is about more than compensation. It's about claiming victory, marking the moment when you refused to be a victim and chose to be a fighter instead. The story of the fence became part of Saguaro Springs mythology, told and retold at HOA meetings, neighborhood gatherings, and newcomer orientations. It served as both a warning and an inspiration. A warning to any future HOA board members who might consider overreach, and an inspiration to homeowners who might face similar battles. Stand your ground, document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to fight when fighting is necessary. As the calendar turned and another year passed, my backyard remained fence-free, open, and entirely mine. The garden flourished, the fire pit hosted countless gatherings, and the space where that barrier had briefly stood became the heart of my property, the place where friends congregated and memories were made. Every laugh, every conversation, every quiet evening with Michelle reminded me that some things are worth fighting for, and property rights, personal freedom, and community accountability are at the top of that list. The fence was gone, dismantled and dispersed, but its legacy remained. A better HOA, a stronger community, and one homeowner who learned that sometimes the best response to injustice is simply to tear down what shouldn't be there and claim what's rightfully yours. I'd done exactly that, and I'd keep those lessons for the rest of my life, ready to apply them whenever anyone tried to put up barriers that didn't belong.